Have you ever felt like your women's ministry leader has missed the mark a little bit? Have you ever felt like something was off and you just couldn't quite figure out what? Well, today we're talking about 5 leadership types you should not be under. And if you find yourself under one of these, speak up and hope change happens, or get out from under their leadership. Welcome to Hold the Fluff, the podcast for Christian women who are done with surface level faith and are ready to grow into spiritual maturity. I'm your host, McKenzie, aka your long distance mentor and sister in the faith. Around here, we trade fluff for truth, comfort for conviction, and feelings for faithfulness. So grab your coffee and stay a while. Hey, let's get into it. As I said in the intro, today we are talking about 5 leadership types or kind of styles, things that your leader does that you want to not be sitting under. Before we dive into that, I just want to remind you that my LENT Workbook is available to purchase on Amazon. LENT starts very soon. I think at the time this comes out, it'll be the following week. So there is still time to purchase this on Amazon and use it to guide your Lent journey. It'll take you from Ash Wednesday, which is February 18th, to Holy Saturday, which is the day right before Easter. It's got so much goodness in it. I talked more details in last week's episode. So if you want more, you can hit the link in the description or in the show notes and go ahead and check out more information about that, or listen to last week's episode where I talk more. And if you are joining me for my free online Bible study, we are 1 chapter away from wrapping up the book of James. And after James, we are doing Luke. So the Luke workbook is also available, not required to purchase to participate in the online study. You can participate completely free by getting chapter guides to your email each week. But if you want to buy the physical workbook and have all of your papers in one place together, that is definitely an option for you. So both of these are linked down below or can be found on sheimitates.com if you are interested in either one. Okay, so let's jump into today's topic. As I said in the intro, we're going to be looking at 5 leadership types or kind of styles that you do not want to sit under in women's ministry. Of course, this could apply outside of women's ministry, but my focus is like Christian women. So we're talking women's ministry in this episode here. And before we dive into kind of those 5 things, I want to lay some groundwork. And the first thing that I want to touch on is a common misconception that women seem to have when they sign up for these types of groups. I myself had it for many, many years, and I used it to justify lots of things that I saw that were probably not the best type of leadership. And so that misconception is that the woman leading the group doesn't really matter. You might say to yourself, it doesn't really matter who the leader is. It doesn't matter if she's a good leader, a bad leader. It doesn't matter what her life looks like. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to go. I'm going to sit. It's going to be fine. I just want to be there for community, or I just want to be there for the study they're doing. It doesn't really matter who the leader of it all is. And this is a very big misconception, because the truth is that the woman that's leading you absolutely does matter. The way she lives her life matters. Who she's truly submitted to matters. If her advice is godly or not matters. If she's living a godly life, what she allows to slide in her life. Does she understand the responsibility that it is to lead other people? Is she pointing you towards Christ, towards herself, towards the world? Does she even want to be the leader at all? So the truth is that it really does matter who you're allowing to be a leader over you. Now, here are a few kind of truths that I want to touch on. The truth is that you are submitting yourself under their leadership and authority to some degree. Now, this isn't going to be the same as who you sit under as like who your pastor is, right? Who the shepherd is over the church that you're in the congregation of, that you are a member of, that you belong to, right? That's going to be kind of a big level of leadership and authority over you that you're submitting your life to when you are a member of a church. But on a smaller level, you are submitting yourself to the leadership, to authority, to the influence of other leaders, whether that's in a women's ministry, in a Wednesday morning Bible study, in a life group or small group, home group, community group. They are called so many different things nowadays, but they all are exactly the same thing. And so whatever version of that looks like, when you sign up for anything where there is a leader It matters who that leader is, and it matters how they lead. Okay, another truth is that you will expect certain things from them. It is just natural. You don't even have to think about it. When you go to a group and you are not the leader, you expect different things from the leader. You know that you're not the leader, and you know that the other women in the group are not the leader. But here's the thing. When things get awkward, when they get uncomfortable, when something maybe kind of happens where people disagree, or maybe you're looking for an answer to something, you're not sure if your answer to the question is correct, you're going to look to that leader to say, hey, step in. Hey, solve this. Hey, mediate their disagreement. Or hey, are you going to reach out to so-and-so? Are you going to do anything about this? Right? You're going to put their answers above the other answers in the group because they're the leader. And there's just something about that automatically makes you feel like they probably have the right answer, that they must have been trained along the way. They must know what they're doing. They must be farther along in their walk than you. And you're going to expect certain things from them, even without realizing it. It's absolutely natural. It's the same way that you expect something from a teacher when you're a student in school. Like the teacher and the student is not the same. And when you hear teacher, you have expectations, even if that person never goes over those expectations with you, or you never really acknowledge them or say them or make a list of them. They are still there. Those expectations still exist. Another truth is that you will naturally place their answers above the other women as being more correct. And I kind of touched on that on accident already. I jumped ahead. The next truth is that you will consider taking your questions to them. So when you have a question, whether it's related to the study or just life in general, the faith in general, the church, right? If there's like a Sunday sermon that really kind of threw you off or you have questions about, you are going to think of your women's ministry leader as someone that you might be able to take that question to, as someone that you're going to hope maybe has an answer for you, can guide you to the right answer, can point you to the direction of a resource, and so on. But when you sit back and say, okay, I have this question, I don't know where to take it, I'm in this group, I have this leader, she's a leader in the church I'm in, I'm going to go ask her, because now that's a comfortable spot for you. You have a relationship with her, you know her name, you feel like you can approach her, you probably have her phone number, and so on. And so you're going to be bringing those questions, concerns, confusion, etc., to her. And that's totally natural as well. But this is also why it matters so much who is leading you and whose leadership you are sitting under. And lastly, jumped ahead again. When something awkward at the table or in the group happens, you will expect the leader to be the one to handle the situation. You're not going to handle it. Most likely you're going to be like, I'm just a group member. I'm just going to sit back, stay quiet, see what the leader does. That's her problem. I don't want to get involved, right? There's a reason you're doing that, because you're not the leader. And that's totally natural as well. So for these reasons and more, it's very important that you pay close attention to who your leaders are, whether that's group leaders or ministry leaders or Wednesday morning leaders, life group leaders, and so on. You're going to want to pay attention to who your leaders are. Leadership should be taken seriously and approached with the awareness that leaders will give an account for how they led, who they led, the way they led, and so on. And at the end of the day, everyone will give an account, right? All of us, whether we're a leader or not. But don't you think that God is paying attention to how people are leading his people? Like, God's people are so important to him. His sheep are so important to him. Don't you think it matters how people are being led? And I know that it does, because there are so many verses that talk about not leading someone astray and watching out for false teachers and not being swayed to and fro and not being double-minded and so on. And so we see that God wants us to not be led away. And that means that our leadership matters, that we shouldn't be sitting under certain people, certain leadership types, certain leadership choices. And just because somebody is professing Christ does not mean that shouldn't be something we're concerned about. We cannot just wash our hands of the concern and the awareness and being on guard simply because they say, I'm a Christian. Most of the false teachers and the deception and all of that is going to come from within. They're going to look the part. They're going to look good. So we cannot just simplify it away by saying, oh, well, it's just another Christian woman. That's not okay. We have to be watchful of what leadership we sit under. Okay, now that we've touched on that, let's go ahead and jump into the 5 leadership types that you should not be sitting under. And the first one is don't sit under leadership that is not biblical. Now, I know you might have just said, well, duh, right? This seems obvious, but in fact, it's really not that obvious because in my experience, women don't pay attention to this. They're looking for friends, they're looking for community. Again, they believe that the leader is probably trained or approved by the pastor, that it's got to be a godly woman who somebody else has decided is allowed to lead, right? Now, that in itself is not always the case. I will just go ahead and throw that out right now. The women are not always approved or known or living a godly life when they're allowed to lead. So just keep that in mind. But also, we are typically not paying close enough attention. And one reason why I think is because we're not in our Bibles enough. And it's going to be very hard for us to spot unbiblical advice and answers and guidance when we don't know what the Bible says. And I think too many women rely on devotionals, on fill-in-the-blank studies, on commentaries, on a sermon, on their favorite Christian women influencer that's a big name in the space, and they just look for, little nuggets from them each day and little glimpses and little encouragements, and we're avoiding our Bibles as a whole, right? I am not above reproach on any of this. I have done all of this. I have experienced all of this. I have believed that misconception for quite a while, and I have justified away all of these things. But as I've gotten stronger in my faith, I've realized more and more how important who your leaders are really truly is. And so I want to tell you about 2 hopefully quick stories. I'm going to try to really keep it nutshelled as much as possible. And I'm not going to share any names or anything, but these are stories that I have actually experienced. These are my personal experiences and situations that I have been under the leadership of and had to decide what I was going to do about that. And so the first one was that I sat under a woman who led our Wednesday morning women's ministry. Okay, she was the whole woman over the whole entire thing. And she slowly but surely started to push a very specific agenda for women to be in leadership within the church. She wanted, at the end of the day, she wanted women to sit on the elder board amongst the men. And she wanted to be able to have a place to raise up the women in her Wednesday morning women's ministry all the way up to the top of the elders. Now, if you're not quite sure why that's a problem, I will just say that I do not believe that the Bible supports female elders or pastors. I think the Bible is pretty clear. I think there can be discussions about female deacons, but I do not believe that when it comes to elders or pastors that the Bible is supporting female. Now, this is definitely a hot topic, and I am not looking to get into a debate about it. There's so much good information out there, so many things that you can look into, so many people that have made videos on this exact thing about whether or not women should be in these types of roles. But I will just say, for me, in my own study of the Bible, I do not see a clear way to say that women can fill those roles. I think it is very clear that it's for men. I think that God is very clear about the order of his church and about individual households and how that kind of operates. And I don't believe that women need to be all the same roles as men. I think we are uniquely made. We are equal, but we are made differently for different purposes, for different roles, for different gifts and talents. And I think that those complement each other. I don't think that we need to all be able to do every single thing the same way. And so, needless to say, I don't believe that the Bible supports women in the role of elder or pastor. And so, for a women's ministry leader to have this viewpoint, to believe this, and to be actively and vocally pushing for it, like it was not a hidden agenda, it was outright, it was stated. She expressed it in front of everybody in a whole room with a printed document that you could take to read more about her stance and so on. And so it was really, really, and I believe still probably is, something that is being heavily pushed by this same person. And so that for me is not leadership that I want to sit under. I don't view that as biblical leadership. And I ended up just, spoiler alert, I made the choice to not return to that women's ministry. And that was very sad for me. It was my only option at that current time. And that was what I gave it up, because I think that living God's way, following the Bible, is very important. And I think that leadership matters, and you have to be very careful where you lead God's sheep. Another story is of another woman that was listed as a leader on a women's ministry situation. And now her leadership roles were definitely limited. She didn't lead in the same way that some of the other women did, but she was still involved in the leadership, listed as a leader by the church for this ministry. And she opened up one day and expressed that her and her husband had decided that she would be the leader of their home, and that she was just better at it, had the skills and the talent for it, and had the kind of personality that fit that role a bit better. And so her and her husband had decided that he wasn't going to be the head of their home, that she was going to be the head of their home and the leader of their home. And she shared this with everybody as if it was no big deal, as if it was something that maybe others were doing, and so on. And I was at this situation, and I ended up being the only one who spoke up and tried to kind of encourage her away from that, tried to kind of point her to scripture and God's design for the house, which God's design is that the husband is the head of the home. He is the leader of the home. And that comes with certain responsibilities and obligations. And that responsibility doesn't change because their personality doesn't match, or because they're not quite sure how to do it, or because it's hard for them to do, or they struggle. It's God's design. So when we profess Christ and we want to live God's way, that is an element that's very clear, is how God designed homes to be and to work and to operate. And so to say like, oh, I'm going to lead my home and not my husband, is living out of God's design, right? And none of us are perfect. I don't live a perfect life. I'm not self-righteous here in any way, but it broke my heart that that was what they came to, and that her husband agreed to that. And it just worried me about what she would be opening herself up to, what her and her husband would be opening their family up to by choosing that, and by not guarding themselves, and by kind of, living in this rebellion, this disobedience. And so I was the only one who kind of said like, oh, I'll be praying for you. Like, I think that that's not what God wants for you. I think, et cetera. We talked about the Bible, and I just said like, I think that you should just be careful, because that's a very slippery slope. And anyway, there was a lot more to it, and we went back and forth in the conversation, and it was all loving and all kind, and there was no like anger or maliciousness or animosity or anything like that. We still talk to this day and stuff, but it was not a leadership that I could continue to sit under, right? Like, I will be in her life. I will help spur her on, hopefully point her to Jesus, be an encouragement, be someone she can talk to, and so on. But I can't sit under leadership knowing that that's a choice that's being made and how they're living. And so those two examples are non-biblical. I don't believe that they line up with what the Bible says we are supposed to do, and how we are supposed to live, and how these types of situations are supposed to be structured. And so for me, I ended up leaving both scenarios, and I was very disappointed because I ended up being the only one who really spoke up. I was around tons of other people who said nothing at the time, but later who called and texted me to express the same sentiment. They agreed with me. They were worried for these situations, but they were just like too afraid to actually say something. And some of these women were other leaders. I was not a leader. I was just a member, a participant at the time. And yet they said nothing, but then called me to say things behind the scenes. And then others were fellow group members or members of the ministry, depending on the situation. And they also called me to express the same sentiment, but only privately, not in that setting, not to her, just behind her. And that I also am not a huge fan of. And so all that to say is just do not sit under people that point you towards their unbiblical agenda or choices or so on, instead of pointing you towards the standard of the Bible. Because although none of us live 100% rightly and correctly and perfectly, we should all be looking to the Bible as our standard. And when it comes down to these types of things, we should be able to say, what does the Bible say? And what do I need to change in my life to align my life with the Bible? And I just felt that those were things that were unbiblical. And so that is what we don't want to sit under at all. And unfortunately, those women are still in those same exact positions, which is a concern for me. But I have done all that I can do. And don't get me wrong, I did, in fact, reach out to appropriate people and whatnot, and handled it to the best of my ability biblically and with bringing attention to it and so on. And so, that tells you something about the church leadership of that place that this is taking place and that these things were allowed to continue. So anyway, I just wanted to share some personal experience with these types of things to give you an example. Number 2, don't sit under leadership that doesn't portray the love of Christ and lovingly correct you or others. So the truth of the matter is that leadership comes with responsibility, and it's not always fun responsibility. It's not always a good time. It's not always conversations you want to have, but it does in fact come with responsibility. And unfortunately, that falls on the leader. Some of the not great things falls on the leader. And so one of the responsibilities of a leader is to lovingly correct, to stand on what the Bible says, to walk alongside someone and point them to Christ. James 5 verses 19 and 20 says, "Brothers, if any among you wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save a soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins." And this is what leaders need to be doing. I'm not saying that these verses are about leaders, but leaders need to help members who wander from the truth turn them back to it, right? This says, brothers, if any among you. So other brothers and sisters, right? This isn't talking about unbelievers. This is talking about believers who are already professing Christ, who are living for Christ. If any among you wanders from the truth, right? The truth is the Bible, God's standard, God's way of living, God's perfect law of freedom. And they wander from that truth and someone turns him back, right? This is why we need people. This is why we need community. This is why we need to live life together. This is why we need to have uncomfortable conversations, not to condemn, not to shame, but because we're literally supposed to notice someone wandering from the truth and turn them back, help them turn them back, restore them, and so on. Depending on, what verses you're looking at, I kind of mixed in a couple there. But then it says, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save a soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. And so we are meant to do this. We are meant to see someone wandering and to turn them back, to lovingly correct them, to portray the love of Christ to them. And unfortunately, in a group setting or a ministry setting, a lot of times the leader needs to be the one that at least starts it. It doesn't need to be the leader the whole time, but the leader needs to start it to encourage it, to create an environment where this is a type of thing happening and that it's a safe space for things like this to happen, and that people can be lovingly corrected without feeling condemned and shamed in this private setting. And so we need to be careful of leaders that don't do this, who just stay positive, who just say whatever makes you feel comfortable, who avoids everybody's feelings, who avoids some of the more difficult conversations. So to share another personal experience real quick, I was in a group and there was a little bit of a issue, a discomfort between myself and another woman. She was walking in this chosen sin, this rebellion, and she was sharing about it. And I pointed her to the Bible. I quoted different scriptures. I kind of gave her scriptures that she could use for encouragement for her situation. And she did not like that. I was told that I did not know her well enough to quote the Bible to her, and that if I knew her better, then I wouldn't have responded with the Bible. I would have responded how everyone else responded, which was, in my opinion, to kind of coddle her, to comfort her, to tell her it's fine, just keep doing what you're doing, an actual phrase said, by the way. And, anyway, so it got awkward in the room, and this lady continued to say a couple things that were not nice to me and that definitely were aimed at trying to discredit what I said, even though what I said was only the Bible and not my own opinion. But her goal throughout the rest of the night was in fact to continue to discredit me and to shut me down and to try and literally make me look cruel to her and that I had wronged her in some way. It was quite the performance, I will say. But I expected that leader to check on me afterwards, right? Because there was a situation, the whole room felt it, the whole room experienced it. It changed everything, right? Like these types of situations do. And she did not check on me at all. Not once did she check on me. And then 2 weeks later, there was another situation, and I reached out to the leader privately and asked her a couple questions. And she responded to me in not a very good way. I'm trying to share without sharing, details or to come off as gossiping and stuff. And so I'm trying to be as nutshelled as I can. But her response was very unkind to me, very defensive of the other woman. And she ended up accusing me of a couple things that never happened, and shared with me that there were a couple things that I could have maybe done better or a little bit differently. Now, this in itself does not bother me at all. I am not above reproach. I expect to be corrected. I expect iron to sharpen iron. I expect people to point out my blind spots. I expect walking alongside people in Christian community in a way that the Bible expresses. And so I don't mind if somebody approaches me and says, hey, I think you were a little wrong here, or hey, I think you could have said this differently, or hey, the way you said this might have hurt her feelings, or she's very sensitive, and so on, right? That's fine. But the issue was that nothing was said to me. I was not checked on, and more than what I'm saying happened. This woman became very cruel to me in front of a whole group of people and was very unkind. And so a lot happened that I've left out, and yet she didn't even check on me. The leader did not check on me. And then when I reached out to her about something completely different, she took that opportunity to just offload all of these things on me. Things that, as a leader, if she really truly felt that 2 weeks prior when that other situation happened, if she really felt that, then she should have approached me lovingly, privately, asked me to meet her for coffee or something, and just expressed to me what she thought, or, oh, I just want to let you know that this might have come off this way, and I'm sure that's not what you intended, but it could have, and so on. And the thing is that she didn't do this. And then even in the moment that she was doing it, it was defensive and not nice and kind of, quietly behind closed doors saying things that she didn't say that night in public. And, she really kind of shared her opinion. And these were women that I did not know very well. I was about 4 weeks in to being a part of the group. And, that's fine. Again, I don't mind being corrected, but she didn't correct me. She didn't reach out to me. She didn't check on me, and she didn't lovingly correct me when it actually happened, which is when it would have been necessary, like the next day or, 2 days later, hey, can we meet for coffee? And so on. And then when she finally did it, she was just like unloading because I reached out to her. And I guess she thought that a private message would be the place to, put me in my place. And so, you don't want to sit under leadership that doesn't portray the love of Christ and doesn't lovingly correct you, even in the simplest form of like portraying the love of Christ by just checking on you when something awkward happens, when there is a tension in the room between you and someone else, when hurtful things are said by someone who doesn't know you simply because they don't like what you pointed out in the Bible. And that is in fact exactly like how that went. She did not like what I pointed out in the Bible, which is oftentimes how most people respond when they're living in chosen sin and someone points that out to them and points them back to the Bible. The Bible can be offensive when you're trying to not live it out, like when you're trying to do what you want to do and the Bible says don't do that. Most people get a little bit uncomfortable, and so that's okay. And so anyway, this is not nutshelled anymore, but the point is that she did not portray the love of Christ to me in what had happened. And then when I reached out to her for something completely different, she went ahead and did not lovingly correct me at the time, and then just unloaded to condemn me and shame me. She also said some very hurtful things, which I am assuming, which is not great to do, but I'll just be honest, like I'm assuming were kind of repeated phrases from the person that it involved, who, I learned later that they are very close. And so, needless to say, I did not return to this group. I was just not loved well, and the standard was far too low. If I have to know you more to quote the Bible in a Christian women's group, that is a far too low standard. Like the basic level should be that we're going to talk about the Bible, right? Like we're in a Christian setting. Okay, moving on. Number 3, don't sit under leadership that won't have the hard conversations. And so there are parts of leadership that are just not fun. And it includes hard conversations, uncomfortable conversations, mediating issues, and so on, right? And I'm not going to really expand on this one much. I think it really kind of fits in with number 2 and some of the examples that I used there, because basically that leader should have had the hard conversations. She should have had a hard conversation maybe in the moment. If how she felt is how she says she felt, she should have had a hard conversation afterwards with each of us, myself and someone else involved. Or maybe she should have got, her and the 2 of us together, and the 3 of us could have sat down and had a hard conversation and kind of cleared the air and, said our piece and expressed ourselves and tried to come to, compassion, mercy, understanding, and, just a loving like restoration, which would have been a hard conversation and kind of uncomfortable, but hopefully would have like ended well. And, she as the leader should have done that because it was her group. And, you want to make sure that you're maintaining a certain type of environment and that these types of things are not growing bigger and bigger, and that women aren't leaving bitter and hurt and building resentment and so on, because that is exactly what comes out of these situations. And so don't sit under leadership that won't have the hard conversations or the necessary conversations. And when I say hard conversations, that doesn't mean that they're like hateful conversations or that they're negative or that they're putting someone down or condemning them or any of this. All of this is within the realm of loving people well. But that's the thing. Loving people well is pointing them to the Bible. It is having these more difficult, uncomfortable conversations and so on. And so please don't think that I'm saying they should just like go out and like boss people around and condemn them and shame them and be legalistic or be like the Pharisees or anything like that. I am not saying that at all. But if you're in leadership for a length of time, you're going to understand what I'm talking about, because you're going to have a difficult conversation, one that you probably don't want to have and aren't even sure if you know how to navigate well enough, but it's still your responsibility to have. So moving on, number 4, don't sit under leadership that doesn't actually lead. Now, leaders don't always want to be the leaders. And I know that that sounds crazy, but there are situations where they might have felt peer pressured, like maybe somebody they knew was in charge of the situation and really pressured them and was like, I need you to lead, I need you to lead, I need a leader, etc. And so they just kind of said yes because they felt like they were helping a friend out. Or sometimes it's a situation where someone is on staff at that church and the church is just trying to get groups going, or they need more groups available. And so they kind of ask that staff person like, hey, we need you to start a women's group. Can you please start a women's group? And I'm sure they're told like, it'll just be a little while and then you can like pass it on to somebody else, but we just need groups going. And that happens more often than you think. And so there are situations where a leader didn't actually want to be a leader. They didn't ask to be a leader. They didn't pray about it. They didn't say, okay, I think God wants me to step into leadership. I'm going to like step out in faith. There are just times where they're like, okay, someone said that I needed to be one, or they needed another person. And so I just said yes, having no idea what I was actually saying yes to. And so leaders don't always want to be the leader, and that shows. It makes a difference. Leaders also tend to give up responsibility by saying things like, oh, I'm just the facilitator, or I'm just like all of you. Please know that these statements are not leading. This is not what a leader says. A leader understands that they're the leader and that that comes with certain responsibilities. So when you hear people say, I'm just the facilitator, I'm just like all of you, I'm not really the leader, it's all of our group, not just my group. Those are statements where they are unloading themselves from the responsibility of leadership. Like they are taking that responsibility off and being like, well, okay, I'm just like all of you. And so then when things arise and that leader doesn't do what you expect a leader to do, then they just get to say like, no, remember, I told you, I'm just a facilitator. I'm not the leader. I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, I'm just one of you, like, I don't know how to handle this, and so on. So when they give up responsibility, they're not leading. Leaders that don't lead also don't check in on you. They may treat the group like, okay, it's this night, you come, we talk, and you leave. If they are not checking in on you outside of the group, and this doesn't have to be every single day, this might be once a week or maybe even every other week. Maybe they ask you to go to coffee once a session and so that they can sit with you and get to know you more. But the point is that these groups are supposed to be where you're doing life together, even if it's just for that short time and not a recurring group where you go back to season after season. They're still designed to live life together, and that leader should be checking on you, seeing how they can pray for you, seeing if you need anything, encouraging you, spurring you on when you're outside of group, and so on. And hopefully you maybe have like a group text and you're all doing that for one another, but that should be led by the leader. That should be an environment set by the leader. Another way that a leader doesn't lead is that they don't do the majority of their homework and aren't prepared to lead the discussions. So I'm not saying that a leader has to have all of their homework done every single week, all of the time. They don't. A leader is human as well. They have their own life stuff. They have their own struggles. They have their own sick family members and so on. But because they are in the position of the leader, it should be expected that they have the majority of their homework done and that they are prepared to lead. If your leader shows up on a regular basis, not like a one-off situation, but on a regular basis shows up and is like, I don't have my homework done again. I have no idea what the questions were. I have no idea what we're talking about. I just barely made it here. That is not a leader that's taking responsibility, that's taking ownership, and that is leading well. And unfortunately, that trickles down to what you learn, what you take away, the experience you have, and so on. And so if a leader isn't leading, then don't sit under their leadership because they're not leading you anywhere good, and definitely not anywhere on purpose, and probably not anywhere at all. You're either going to stay right in the same situation or you're going to get worse because they're leading you nowhere or they're leading you backwards. And leaders should be leading their people somewhere intentionally, even if it's one step forward. And a leader that's not leading is leading you nowhere or the wrong where, right? The wrong place, the wrong direction. And that's not good for you or your faith or your time that you can't get back. And the fifth thing that I'm going to say that you should not sit under is don't sit under leadership that allows sin and disobedience to be accepted. So as I mentioned with my previous kind of example and story, there was a woman in this situation who was expressing outright sin, knew it was sin, expressed how they were choosing it, expressed how they liked it, how it comforted them, how they don't want it to change, and so on. And they're expressing this to a group, and it's clear that it's rebellion. It's clear that it's disobedience. It's clear that they're going against God's word. They know it. They're saying these types of phrases, and then they are justifying it with like their comfort and their feelings, and that they're just tired because life is exhausting. And so, they just do certain things because it brings them comfort. And it's like that situation was not only allowed, it was coddled and enabled and encouraged to press on. Some of the responses were, oh, well, God knows your heart, so it's okay. Just keep doing what you're doing. God knows your heart. He can see your heart. Like, it's okay. Literally repeated phrases. Okay, I am not making this up. This is not a summary. These are exact words. Another person gave the encouragement to watch a certain type of YouTube video again and again and again until this person felt better. And there were other not so great advices as well. But the point is that the leader herself said a couple of these things, agreed with a couple of these things, and never pointed this woman to the Bible. No one's advice except mine, which is what, made everybody uncomfortable. Nobody's advice pointed to the Bible except mine. And all mine did was point to the Bible. So much of the other advice was just opinions or comfort. Mine was not my opinion. It was the Bible. And I don't say that to say that like my advice is always perfect or good or the only right one. I've given not so good advice many times before. But in this exact situation, all I did was quote the Bible and give verses for like encouragement and verses that were specific to what she was struggling with. And I was told not to quote the Bible until I knew her better. In a Christian women's group setting, ministry setting, I was literally told by the leader to not quote the Bible until I knew her better, this other woman, until I knew them better, that I just need to wait to quote the Bible until I've been in the group a little bit longer. And my question to that is, how long does somebody need to be in a group before they can quote the Bible? In a Christian group setting, before they can quote the Bible? Is that 1 week, 2 weeks, a year? How long is that before you can quote the very Bible in a Christian setting? The standard for all of our lives, that none of us are living perfectly, should be the number one thing quoted, turned to, pointed to by every single person in the group. Even when we're not living it out well, we should still know that this is the standard, and we should be able to point to the Bible and be like, I know I'm supposed to be living this way, but I just am struggling, right? Like that's what should be happening. And yet the leader of this situation allowed the sin, coddled the sin, told this woman to keep doing what she was doing, that it would be okay, that God knew her heart, and she should just keep on doing what she was doing if that is what was comfortable for her, if that is what made her feel good, if that was what she was able to do at the time and what worked best for her. And I'm not kidding. These are exact quotes, okay? This is like not me summarizing it or changing the words or anything. These are the actual phrases that were said in a situation that I sat in. So don't sit under leadership that allows sin and disobedience to be accepted and then even more so encouraged. One of the other stories I shared about the woman and her husband deciding that she would be the head of their household. That is sin and disobedience to what the Bible says. It was an active choice that these people were making and sharing as if it was absolutely okay. And then the main leader over all of it, because this was a leader, so that leader is allowing sin and disobedience, but the leader over everything, who would have been over her, also allowed this. And then above that, the actual church leadership that this was brought to allowed this sin and disobedience to go on without removing her from leadership for a time or anything that really came along and helped her and her husband live in a biblical way, or to get counseling, or to meet with the pastor, and so on. And so just at so many levels, sin and disobedience was allowed in the leadership situation. And leaders aren't perfect. They will fall. They will make mistakes. They will struggle. They will have sin. And they will have sin that allows them to continue being a leader as long as they've repented of it and are getting help or being honest with their struggles, seeking God, and so on. And then there is sin that a leader will struggle with where they actually need to take a break from leadership. They need to step down or be removed or so on, and not be able to lead and be over other people in the church or in the body. And so those are the 5 types of leadership that I would say you should not sit under. And so just to recap, it's don't sit under leadership that is not biblical. Don't sit under leadership that doesn't portray the love of Christ and lovingly correct you or others. Don't sit under leadership that won't have the hard conversations. Don't sit under leadership that doesn't lead, and don't sit under leadership that allows sin and disobedience to be accepted. So now I want to transition into talking briefly about what you can do if you realize you're in this situation. So if you listened to all of this and you said, oh, I'm actually sitting under a leader right now who does one of those things, or maybe a couple, or maybe even all 5, that's okay. There are different options available to you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to leave their leadership right away. I know that this has been based on, 5 leadership types you should not be under, and I fully stand by that sentence, but there are things you can do before working up to the decision to walk away from that person's leadership. And so I want to touch on that briefly. So the first thing you can do is you can bring it to the leader's attention privately. You can meet with this woman one-on-one, express your concerns, express what happened, and talk it out with her, or share what you are hoping she'll do in the future, or how you would have liked her to handle that situation, and so on. Of course, this is nuanced. You might be talking to the leader who's just a table leader, and there's a leader over this person, or you might be talking to the person who's leading the whole thing, right? These are nuanced. It also may be nuanced in the conversation itself. Is the leader actually the one walking in sin, or do they just have unbiblical advice, right? That's going to affect the type of conversation you have and the outlook that you're going to be looking for when you talk to that leader. What happens next? What change comes next? What do they realize in that conversation, and how do they handle all of that, right? All of that is going to inform what you do after that conversation. Another thing you can do is you can bring it to the main leader over the whole situation. So if this is a Wednesday morning Bible study per se, and that you have a scenario with the group leader, the table leader, then you can, of course, meet with her directly. But maybe if that doesn't create change, then you can take it to the main leader in charge, or the main woman over that whole ministry, and sit with her and have that same conversation, or request that all 3 of you get together and have one conversation at the very same time, and everybody is looped into it. And you can also bring it to church staff if this is within a church. Now, there will be situations where there are Christian group settings or women's ministry type settings that are outside of a local church, but for the majority, these types of things are going to be attached to a local church, whether it's a life group, a women's ministry, a Wednesday morning Bible study, or so on, oftentimes it's going to be attached to a local church. And in that aspect, you can then bring it to the church staff, the elders, the pastors within the church. And seeing as how you may be in a situation where you're dealing with conflict, right? These aren't necessarily going to be the most comfortable conversations when you're pointing out what someone is, not doing very well or doing unbiblically or whatnot. So it's not to say that there's conflict right away, but you are bringing up something that, might cause conflict or that someone might not appreciate you bringing up and so on. And so if you look in the book of Matthew, it actually gives us good instructions for dealing with conflict and how to approach people, when to take somebody with us, and so on. So I would also encourage you to spend some time in Matthew looking at those instructions before doing anything so you can handle this situation and possibly this conflict in a very biblical way. Now, after all of that, if nothing is addressed or changed, then you need to leave that leadership. So if you bring things to attention of certain leaders and nothing is addressed, there's no course of action, there's no change that you can see down the line, let's say over the next couple of weeks or the next couple of months, right? You want to give a decent amount of time to let people change or create new habits or to, slowly make changes or make different choices or to be held accountable by higher leadership and so on. But if nothing is changing, then you need to leave. Like, you have sat under it, you have had this experience, you have done all the right things, brought it to all the right people, had all the right conversations, remained biblical and loving and kind, right, and humble in this situation, but you don't want to sit under this type of leadership. And so you need to leave, and you need to leave the group, even if it's your only option. As I mentioned previously, I have left situations where it was my only option at the time. I've lived in large cities and I've lived in small cities. And sometimes, especially in a small city, you might not even have a lot of church options, let alone a lot of church group options. And maybe there's one ministry in the whole town that, has a Wednesday morning Bible study or something. And that's what you want to go to. And then now that's the thing that's not working out well, and you have to leave in order to guard yourself spiritually and make sure that you're sitting under biblical leadership that's going to point you towards Jesus. And so unfortunately, even if it's your only option, you may need to make the hard decision to leave. And I will say that it's just not worth the damage that it will do for you to stay. It's not worth the gymnastics for you to justify what that person is doing or try to separate their advice, because now they're living unbiblically. So I have to pick and choose their advice. I have to wonder, what's the motive to what they're saying? Is that their opinion? Is that the Bible? Did God really say that to them? And so on. And I don't say that lightly. I actually have a couple of very good friends that have stayed in some of the situations that I've chosen to leave, and they agree with me. They agree with the situation being wrong or being at least a concern. And yet they choose to stay because they believe that they can make a difference, that they can be a change, that they can offset what that leader is doing and hopefully be able to, communicate with the women or say other things and kind of lead the others. And I just want to say that has not actually panned out how they had hoped. They are not making the bigger difference for those women. The leaders are. And change has not happened. And they are still in these situations that are of a concern for them. And so I just want to let you know that it's not worth the damage that it will do to you to have to worry about that, to have to stress, to have to pick through what is being said and shared and taught and so on. You just don't want that at all. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, "Don't be deceived. Evil companionships corrupt good morals." And I want to say this can happen and does happen within a church setting as well. Again, we cannot think that we can be led astray only by the world or only by non-believers. That's just not possible. There are wolves in sheep's clothing who are ready to be a false teacher, to lead you astray, to point you away from Jesus, who don't know their Bibles well. Maybe they have the best of intentions and they want to do a good job, but maybe they just don't know their Bible well enough. Maybe they don't know or believe in the core tenets of the Christian faith, and so they can't possibly lead you to that or point you to that direction because they don't know it for themselves. And so maybe their intentions are good, but they just don't have a right amount of knowledge. They're not spending time in their Bible. And so people are persuaded away from within. False teachers look the part, and we need to be on guard for what and who we let in to influence us. And we shouldn't take this lightly. God doesn't take this lightly. We shouldn't take this lightly. This is very important. And of course, another option for all of these things besides having hard conversations, choosing to leave, is actually to start your own group or start your own women's ministry, start your own Bible study. It doesn't matter who the woman is or what her title is or who allowed her to have that title. If you know that these types of things are happening, these 5 types of things that we mentioned, and there are more that are not on this list today, if you know that these things are happening, don't allow yourself to remain under their leadership and authority. Get out, and if needed, pursue your own group. Start your own group. Be a better leader than what you were led by. Make an actual difference by going and leading women in the right way, and then raise them up to lead groups in the right way so that they can go out and start a group and branch a group. And that change can begin like that. That change can start with you, with me, with us, going and doing this ourselves and being the change that we wish we saw in other settings, right? And if you choose to start a group, then I highly recommend getting a copy of my free group leaders manual. You can find it on sheimitates.com. It's about 19 pages, I believe. It is a getting started guide for someone who is wanting to start a group and lead a group, but isn't quite sure how to be a good leader or what that looks like. Or maybe you've been leading for a while, but you've never really been trained or guided or really had help with leadership. And so you're just kind of out there winging it. My Getting Started manual is going to be a huge help for you because my free group leaders manual actually goes over what a leader is, what a leader isn't, ways to connect with your group. It gives you checklists for launching your group. It gives you papers that you can actually use with your group itself and so on. Answers some of the hard questions. By no means does it include every type of thing that you should know as a leader or be taught as a leader or that someone should pass on to you, but it is very good, very informative, very helpful, and it will literally help you be a better leader than most from day one, simply because so many leaders have nothing like it. They experience no training, no one guiding them, no one checking in on them, no one shepherding them, no one helping them navigate what it is to lead a group of other people, let alone Christian women, right? You're not just leading people, you're leading God's people in a Christian setting where you're pointing them towards the Bible and helping them live a life for Christ. This is not something that we should take lightly. This is not something that people shouldn't be trained up to do well. And so if you are interested in starting a group of your own and making a difference in leadership and raising up women and, kind of trying to change some of the lack that you see and the gaps that aren't bridged and the way that leaders aren't leading well, then I recommend getting a free copy of my group leaders manual. I will have that linked in the description below, or you can head to sheimitates.com and you'll be able to utilize what that resource offers and get a lot of really good information to get you started. So now I want to go ahead and turn it over to you. Have you ever had to remove yourself from a women's group because of unbiblical leadership? I would love for you to share your story in the comments below. Please be respectful, aim not to gossip, and please remove all names or change the names so that you're protecting the people that are involved. As you realize, I did not share super specifics or any names with you when I shared some of the experiences I've had. And I just would love to hear if you've ever had to remove yourself from a women's group, because these things do happen. They often go untalked about. People often wonder if they made the right decision. And so if you've ever wondered that, I just want to tell you that you absolutely made the right decision to leave an unbiblical leadership situation, no matter how hard it is or what you had to give up or what friends stayed behind or who called you crazy or who said you were overreacting. I just want to encourage you that you did the right thing. There is leadership that we should not be sitting under, and we shouldn't take that lightly. We should hold leaders to a bit of a higher standard than we do other group members and other believers, right? Because they are in leadership. They are leading and guiding and shepherding and directing other people. And that does come with a higher standard, with higher expectations, and with more responsibility. So share your experiences with me in the comments below. I look forward to reading them, and I look forward to being back here with you again next week. Thanks for joining me today on Hold the Fluff. If this episode challenged or encouraged you, please share it with another Christian woman who's hungry for more depth and honest conversations like this one. And if you're not already, come study the Bible with me over on YouTube as well. And if you want more resources for growing in your faith, living it out, leading a group, or mentoring one-on-one, well, head to sheimitates.com. Until next time, keep imitating Jesus and be a woman worth imitating. Bye.